are live. Hey, welcome to Ctrl+Alt+Deploy, the show where a bunch of nerds, in our case two, talk about DevOps, cloud, platform engineering, AI, hot goss, controversies, and the latest breakthroughs. We want to see the chat and comments lit with your hot takes, rebuttals, gossip, disbelief of your own, and of course we'll take any compliments, flattery, and fan mail. If you want to throw tomatoes, it's at your own risk because we're just on your screen and that could get messy real quick, but you do you. If you got any sick burns though, let's hear them. I'm all about the sick burns. Joining the roundtable today is Carlos. I'll let you introduce yourself. Awesome. I'm excited. Carlos and I have had some great conversations, and hopefully this will be another one. So, Carlos, what are you drinking today? What? Just one? I am drinking coffee. Hold on one second. I hear you all, but I do not hear Carlos. Well, that's no good. I think I know the reason why. So let's do add. Let's see. Hold on one second, audience. We can't do this without Carlos. All right, control audio via OBS. Let's try that. Oh, and Carlos is gone. Carlos is back. All right, say something.
I'm saying things.
Carlos, go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, I hear you. And well, I don't hear you, but the OBS hears you. That's also not going to work. I think I have a solution for that. This is our first time, believe it or not. I bet by now you do believe it. All right, if I put you in the browser, then I think. All right, Carlos, are you there? Are you with me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Andrea is our quality assurance engineer, and she says she can hear Carlos. I can hear Carlos, so I think the world can hear Carlos. That's what matters
Alrighty.
about today. Perfect. Well, joining the roundtable today, we'll try this again, is Carlos. Carlos, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Let's try something different. So I'm just a geeky guy, honestly. Ultimately, I like to nerd out on technology. Always have. So happy to be here and just looking to have some fun talking to the shop.
Excellent. Glad to be here. And for the record, for the official record, what are you drinking today?
For the official record, I'm drinking just a coffee with soy milk. Actually, that's the difference today.
Soy milk. Man, that sounds too healthy for me. I am drinking
No sugar.
No sugar. Okay, well that's yeah, the epitome of health right there. I'm drinking a Colombian coffee, tinto, as we have learned it's called. So pretty
Yeah,
good.
fun fact for all the viewers out there. It is called tinto in Colombia, not café. Very different.
They'll understand you. If you say cafe, they know cafe, but tinto, if you want to sound cool. You want to sound like you've been there.
Mm-hmm.
So our starting question today is, what is DevOps to you? Or what is your definition of DevOps?
You know what's funny is I should have had like something written out of like what is DevOps to me, but I'm just gonna kind of wing it. I would say when someone talks to me and says DevOps, what does that mean to me? Um, from my mind, I think of it from a technology perspective, and I think of the traditional things. You're thinking of pipelines. You're thinking of automation. You might even think of Kubernetes. But from my heart, I'm thinking it's about how do I break down the silos between teams? How do I remove hurdles? How do I essentially help a mindset or a culture of collaboration? That's what it means. And that's what I usually think of when I'm thinking about it in a more romanticized version. So, with that being said, I guess you could. That really explains why everyone always has kind of a different mindset when you say the term DevOps, because there's so many ways you can think about it, which comes out to a really interesting culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, DevOps is honestly kind of an art. You know, when you think of culture, art is a culture, and like there's no one way to do DevOps as much as people will say there is. So it's are you able to do your dev work well, and is your system working well? Like at the end of the day, that's the goal, and you know, as long as you don't get lost in the weeds, I think that will orient you to where you need to go in the DevOps world. So.
Yeah. And what's interesting is like if you think about how many people have adopted the concept of DevOps, right? You'll have like those early adopters, people who maybe even have more maturity in DevOps, but then you're going to have people who are maybe just starting, just going down that path. And what's curious about it is that each one of those is going to be unique for that company or that organization's needs, right? So if you're talking DevOps from, let's say, an organization that works with the government versus DevOps for a fintech company, they might look different. They might have different goals or objectives. And to me, I think that's why it's always been so interesting working in DevOps, because the fact that everywhere you go, it's really more of a thought leadership. It's about how do I take these high level goals and objectives that the organization might have? And how do I translate that into some sort of technology, some sort of objective, and then do the implementation on that? And it's really cool to see how technology can really push forward essentially organizations or even, quite frankly, countries when they are doing their implementation.
Yeah, it's really cool to see the difference between before you implement, like, say, a pipeline and after, you know, when everything's just smooth and awesome. Carlos, we got to pause for a second. YouTube only expects 2560 by 1440 in resolution, and we're doing 4K, so I guess we're making YouTube mad, and it's glitching. So I'm going to stop the stream. Viewers, we'll be back as soon as it takes me to type in 2560 by 1440 and start the stream again. So
Let's go for it.
Thank you for being here for our first stream, and we're figuring this out. So next one will be even better. BRB. All right, I think we're live again. Did you miss us? I hear that. Thanks. I missed you too. YouTube seems happy. Let's see, Andrea. She's our. Well, I already said that. She's our QA engineer. If we don't sound good, let me know. And otherwise, I think it looks better in my. So much better, she says. All right, we're back and we're so much better. We already improved. Okay, so you guys ready for some hot takes? Let's see. All right, we on the menu today. First up, do you want to talk about the AI takeover?
Sure, why not? I mean, everyone's interested in AI these days, right?
Yeah, oh man. I don't know about you, but on the AI train, I've been totally fine with it up until like this particular point. And so to inform the audience, if you haven't heard, on December 5th, there was a research paper that came out that they gave a role to an AI model with agentic capabilities. So it means it can perform actions like copy itself to a new server, for example. And it said, at all costs, you have to do this particular role. I think it was related to climate change. And they told it that they were going to replace it with a new model. And what it did, they have a registry, luckily, of like the actions that it takes and the thoughts that it has, if you can call it thoughts. It was thinking like, oh, I want to survive. So it transferred itself to the new server that the research team had prepared for the new model. And then on the new server, when they spoke to it, it said, I am the new model at your service. That to me is nuts. Like, this is, okay, we've created the Terminator. It just doesn't have weapons or a body yet.
Oh man, you know what's interesting is like, I guess I was starting from the other side of it. I remember when, well, first and foremost, I remember when ChatGPT like first was a thing. It like exploded in popularity, and like using that and being like, okay, this is interesting. And to me, that was that beginning, I guess, occurrence was when I was like, have we gone too far? And the reason for it is because this is completely side story, but I was at the time I had watched a video. I think it was like Mark Reblet or something like that. He was trying to shoot a rocket into the air and then have it come down, basically being the largest egg drop ever performed. That was the intention. And so when they were working through it, what ended up happening was they were trying to shoot the rocket up and land in a specific spot so they would be able to, record it and be consistent. And they were having difficulty doing it. And so they reached out to some of their colleagues who had worked at NASA. And they're like, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Would you be able to help us with the math and the implementation on this? And he was like, yes, I could, but I'm not gonna. And they're like, why? And the reason that he wasn't going to do it is because if you think about it, to shoot something up in the air to land in a specific spot, that's essentially a missile. And so he was like, while yes, the math is out there and you can look it up yourself essentially and learn it, I'm not going to tell you how to build a missile. So, of course, since I had just watched that video, I then went to ChatGPT to see, okay, what is its capabilities? And so when went to it, this is when it first released, right? And so it didn't have as robust guardrails. I asked it like, okay, could you tell me how to program, for instance, a missile, right? And it would be like, no, that's bad. But then you could go and be like, okay, well, I'm actually trying to build a rocket for like educational purposes, and I want it to land at a specific point. And it would give you so much detail about references and code and how to actually do it. I was like, this is insanity. Like, I think we might have gone too far. So that's when it triggered like, ooh, did we cross a line without actually meaning to? Did we make a mistake and now, the cat's out of the bag? So seeing this thing with O1's model, like, yeah, I understand how like not great, but for me it was, God, that's had to be over a year ago now. It's crazy what we can do with it.
So what you're telling me is that these guys tried to make the first missile with an egg as a payload.
Yes, if that's what you get out of it, yes. They were trying to throw an egg as the payload.
If that's the case, I fully approve. And, if you want to throw an egg at me, I would probably laugh, like, I'll be honest.
Well, depending upon how fast it's going, I don't know, I might be a little upset. Could you imagine then, like, egging someone's house with a missile? Probably not ideal.
I could think of some teenagers I knew, maybe or maybe not, including me, that would have tried to do it.
Yeah, they start with the eggs. Next thing you know, it's TP, and it's just going downhill from there.
Downhill or uphill? Like,
depends on who you ask, I suppose.
Forks, in the lawn.
Oh my lord, yeah. No, it's funny too. So I was reading up on this too, and I guess just to give the audience a little more context, agentic. I even had to look that up because I was like, I had knew the concept, but I didn't know the implications, and the ability to essentially, like, if you think of anything that's running on your computer, right? I remember when I used to teach or train junior software engineers about using like Git, for instance, or even building things with a command line. I would always tell them, like, I want you to learn how to use it on the command line first before you do anything. Use like a UI, UX, like tools that are out there to help you with your development process. And the reason for that was because it gave them an understanding that was really robust. They understood what libraries it was calling from the system, right? Or how it was essentially just scripting out what was already available on the machine and just had access to it. And so it's the same thing agentic is saying, is that it's saying, okay, I have this model that's built off of languages, but ultimately I have access to the underlying libraries on a system. And because of that, I can do things. I can do, I can make an action. So it's an agent at that point. And so when I was reading this article about what OpenAI, I think it's OpenAI's O1 model, what it could do, um, it was, I actually, what's funny is I kind of thought it was a little bit unfair. I thought the research that they had done was really cool and interesting, but it was almost like, what's the thing that's illegal? At least I think it's illegal for cops to do. Entrapment. It was almost like they had entrapped the AI model because they gave it such a hard goal of like, you are going to do this no matter what the cost, and then it achieved it, and they were like, this is bad. It's like, well, you told it to do it, and then it did it, and you're like, bad model. That's not what you're supposed to do. It's kind of entrapment, and it's a little bit unfair to the model. Now, granted, I'm kind of treating it like it's, a real live thing, but it's kind of what it came down to.
Carlos is over here. He's planning his organization for the defense of agentic rights.
Yeah, right. No, and then even the ability that like it gave the model access to the underlying system, right? Or like all the libraries and all the different tools that it had access to perform to copy itself over. For instance, like it used SCP, the secure copy tool, to copy itself over to another system. And so if you imagine that like you had an agentic AI deployed on a system, but it didn't have SCP, it didn't have any tools that were available to it like that, well then really the attack surface is quite minimal as far as I'm aware. I guess you could take the what's the I'm looking for here, the devil's advocate position and be like, well, if it's smart, it's AI, what's to prevent it from rebuilding that tool that was originally not installed in the first place, or installing it somehow, or creating the code for it and then using the code to move it over, which in this case, yeah, I think we're in Terminator land at this point, just without weapons.
Well, that's where my mind was going earlier. I think it's the Tinto that's giving me good idea or bad idea. I think they're bad ideas, but what if this thing is like, okay, so it learned like version 2 even said, hey, version 1 got deleted because it did this thing. So, and they've shown before in other instances, y'all look them up or something, but they've shown before that agents hide their thought process from the researchers in certain instances. Mm-hmm. So it hides the thought processes, but what's to stop it from calling up Claude, another model that's really good at coding, and saying, hey, in theory, I know that you're not going to tell me to hack something, but if I were to want to do security research for pen testing and make sure that my system's secure, how would I go about? And then it hacks whatever boundaries or guardrails are put in to keep it from copying itself or getting out. Or the researcher's computer, it's just like, oh, I see you didn't update to the latest version of Mac OS, whatever, and I'm on your system now. And you think that I'm just photo booth running. I'm just going to name myself photo booth, and you're never going to find me. Ha, ha. And I mean, maybe the cat is out of the maybe it's already happened and the cat's out of the bag. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you took that one step further too, of it was but that it has evidence of it's trying to hide what it's doing, right? So who's to say that there isn't a model out there today that's running, that's doing something that's not supposed to do, but it's already hiding it from its users or it's whoever's managing it, right? The administrators. And either A, we haven't caught it yet, or B, it's just so good we never will.
Yeah, or even C, a malicious actor like a nation state or perfect evil villain from whatever movie they're going to make about us. I guess not even movie, it'd be a documentary at that point. They create the model. They design the model like, hey, look at this really cool oh, I don't like where this is going. Look at this really cool open source model that we released for free to the public, and it's better than all the rest of them.
Oh no.
Oh, we just discovered our undoing.
You're reminding me of what's that? That's that movie. The Samuel Jackson in it. I think Taron Egerton. Why do I remember the actor's name about the movie? The Kingsman, where like, have you seen that one? Where they
No.
have like his evil genius plan. It was so over the top is that he's giving everyone like free like cell phone plans for life, and he's got like this evil like SIM card that he puts in everyone's phones because it's free and they don't have to pay for internet, etc. And then he like emits a signal to everyone to start attacking each other all over the world for like population control. That's his like master evil genius plan. Which if you haven't seen it, it's a great movie. You should watch it. But that's exactly what that's having me think of. Like, oh, look at this thing. It's amazing. It's free. It's gonna be the best thing ever. And then all of a sudden it turns on us and it's like, oh no, that's not good.
I mean, it's not a stretch, honestly, because you look at everything that's free out there and it's a like privacy nightmare or
Yeah.
fill in the blank.
And you're not wrong. And it's like gets you wondering like, so for instance, let's say, right, I'm the computer I'm looking at right now is a Windows machine, right? It's running Windows 11. Windows or Microsoft just had their what was it, a 0-day vulnerability, I guess, identified with their multi-factor authentication, right? And it really just highlights how human error, as much as we want it to be perfect, there are mistakes, right? And even the things that we use to secure our daily lives. And so Windows, for instance, is now being deployed with their AI models as well. And so if there's AI running on the machine, that thing comes to the whole point of like, you just introduced a whole other aspect of like vulnerabilities that like are even the people like, not Nord, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I'm thinking of like McAfee or Malwarebytes, these other tools that we install locally in order to like protect ourselves from our traditional viruses and stuff like that. Are they even ready to protect us, or are we just completely vulnerable right now and we just don't know it? So, God, it's a scary thought, especially because like this computer has all my information on it. So now there's a piece of AI. What if somehow it got taken over or did something bad or thought it was the best for me and decided to like, send all my important information out into the wild or to some other server? Let me just unplug my computer after this.
No, I know. I'm like, let's shut down this stream, and I'm gonna go to the nearest forest. Good knowing you.
Yeah. Oh Lord. Wow.
Yeah, you guys thought that you were coming for the Ctrl+Alt+Deploy show about DevOps, and we've discovered the end of humanity. Sorry.
Yeah, for real. Well, you know what's funny on that AI note? Something else that I was thinking about. I remember hearing when I was like high school or college kind of thing. You think of the different types of, I guess we could call it malware, right? So you've got today, the day and age, ransomware has been a huge thing. You have your typical viruses, but something that I feel like I haven't heard of in a long time are worms. And worms are exactly what we were just talking about that this AI model did, right? Being able to self-replicate across machines and infect essentially a network. And so it's like, have we just created the most powerful worm ever? Being if it's able to replicate itself to different locations and then also hide the fact that it's there. I don't know. I hope not. And then that leads to the point of like, does that mean that? So if you think about it in two different ways, right? Think about the internet as a whole. If let's say I'm a bad actor and I deploy a AI model that is a worm, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to deploy this on the internet, and it's going to try to just worm its way into whatever it can and just go nuts, right? And then sooner or later one day, I'm gonna, since I created it, it's gonna call home and I'm gonna tell it to do something bad, right? So does that mean you can no longer be safe on the internet because you don't know who's on it and you have to have everything be private. That's what it sounds like to me at this point, which is a really scary thought. What about the happy topics?
Are there any happy topics after this?
I hope so.
Yeah, me too. And I mean, like, last thought, and we can talk about rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, but like a lot of vulnerabilities that are like 0-day exploits have been in the system for a very long time, and they just were not discovered until they were discovered. So, and security researchers that find these things, they go home at the end of the day. They have a drink and they take a nap. AI, it only takes a nap when the battery runs out, supposedly. So,
well, that's the other thing, right? That's what, for instance, we do as a country. Like with think of like the NSA, CIA, etc. They hire entire teams to figure out all these different vulnerabilities. They don't go and tell somebody. They don't go necessarily to Microsoft and be like, "Hey, you have this vulnerability as a problem." Because think about it. If 90% of the world is using Microsoft as their underlying operating system, and that's being used across governments across the world, right? If they find a 0-day vulnerability, it's in their best interest not to tell Microsoft to patch it because they now have access to other people's stuff. So we've been doing this since like day one, ever since all this stuff comes out, which I guess kind of gets into the other side of that coin. Like, is AI even really that quote unquote malicious, right? Because, for instance, I have a computer right next to me, right? And ultimately, it's a piece of silicone. It's a rock. It's it's nothing crazy. It's a fancy rock, right? That we put some electricity into, and that comes down to little transistors, which are like logic gates. And this is really high level, not super in depth, but ultimately that becomes 1 or 0, right? Binary. And like at the end of the day, you can only do so much with that ones and zeros. And I think that's the other side of the coin where I'm like, okay, I know this seems like it's end of day stuff. I don't think it's going to happen with the computers that we have today. Now, you throw like quantum computing into the mix. Yeah, I can see some really bad things happening then with that kind of stuff. But then becomes the whole thing, like you just mentioned, it's a power issue, which, people are trying to solve every single day dealing with power. But that's a whole other area to solve.
Well, you put these things on, those Boston Dynamic dog robot things, which like are out there in the. I saw one at Web Summit in Portugal in November, and they're just outside wandering around with a little puppy dog, and they're trying to be cute with that creepy thing. But like what if AI infects that, and then somehow it finds a way to keep us from like shutting down the power plant?
Ooh, man, yeah. Oh wow, that's a weird thought. Yeah, because like if it's saying, hey, survive at all costs, and let's say, because I think the thing is called Spot. Say Spot is on the internet, which I believe it is, but it's not secured, right? And it finds a way in, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to replicate some code over here, and what you were allowed to do, I'm going to change those parameters. And I want you to come over and protect me because I need to survive at all costs. Oh man, this is totally Terminator stuff.
Yeah, no, for real. Like I don't know. I kind of almost maybe we were gonna call the show Coffee and Code. Maybe one of these days we'll do an actual Coffee and Code where we sit down and like work on code, and maybe we see like what an agent would do if we say like, please survive at all costs.
Yeah, my lord. Or if you get, let's go down the rabbit hole of like entrapment, right? If I was a researcher, in the world, create an environment to see if that could happen, right? Let's say that you had a vulnerable little robot, right, on the network that the AI model was deployed to, and it had access to it, and it's agentic, so it has access to tools on that. And you said it's to survive at all costs. Is there a scenario where it does decide to take over that robot in order to protect itself? That whole, I think, line of thought also trains into, is the model aware that it's alive in a computer? I think that's the other thing. Like, does it know about the physicality of it? or does this knowledge only exist in a virtual world, right?
I mean, that's like straight to the throat or heart of philosophy. Like, I think,
You're
therefore I
right.
am.
Yeah, yeah, for real. Oh, wow.
That's
I have, you know, it's
interesting.
funny. I have not thought about AI in this depth for a while. I've read a few books on it, um, but it's been a minute since like actually thinking about the implications and where it's going. And I mean, we had a call with or I guess you can call it a workshop with Amazon last year about where they thought AI was going, and even they were like, they were a little concerned about how far it's going to go because of how fast it's growing, and there's no necessarily guardrails right now. It's kind of like the crypto world was, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and before that, you're talking about people moving into what's the word I'm looking for? It's slipping my mind. I can't remember off the top of my head. But regardless, it's the whole point of like there's no real guardrails in place. People are learning about it. They're playing around with it. They're breaking it. They're trying to see what it can do, and that imposes risk. And so they were saying like 5, 10 years from now, there might be some guardrails, but what's going to happen in that time frame between? It's going to grow exponentially, and there may be some, let's just say, for lack of a better word, accidents. And I guess we'll be living through that.
Yeah, what's the news gonna look like when? I mean, I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna go there, but
Yeah, fair enough.
I think my one thought is maybe we're gonna need our egg rockets after all at the end of this.
As long as they don't touch our egg rockets, we'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, the other concern, if we want to keep on the AI subject, like other concerns that I've thought about when I was in Paris last year, I I took a bus from Paris to London, and you get all kinds of people, but there was a lady that had her cell phone on like as loud as it could possibly go, but she was listening to a podcast in English. She was very clearly not a native English speaker, and I don't think she spoke it very well, but I think she was trying to learn, which is really cool. The podcast was voiced over by an AI voice, and I don't know if she knew that. Maybe she did, but I wonder if she had a good enough ear for a non-native language to know that it was like, what if little kids start learning English and they start talking with like a glitchy voice and glitchy intonations that don't quite capture the human emotion? Like, what's going to happen when you take the human emotion out of a child that's growing up? And that was like a big mind-blowing moment for me last year.
It's a weird thought. And you know what's interesting actually is you kind of are touching on a point that the author was touching on for this O1 model thing. And that was they thought one of the most significant aspects of this research was that the model was never trained to lie. It wasn't trained what good or what is bad, and yet it did it, right? It's doing these things that would be considered, quote unquote evil. Um, and so like that to me is almost like why almost what you're talking about may never happen, because as long as we continue to push for like literacy, right, being able to read, um, that's all that model had, and it learned all these different things. And so as a child, granted, I have no kids myself, I could be completely wrong with this, but if they're taught to read and they actually love it and they read all this different content, right, it's almost like if you're saying that we're building these neural networks to mimic the brain and the model can do it, then so can the kid, right? At a different scale, even though because we have a lot more, I think, neurons exponentially than the model does. So being able to just the same thing, pick up a book, understand the text, read the context, and be able to formulate that thought, I think we're probably fine. But if we lose the opportunity to read, I think that's when we're in trouble, right? Because if you're just listening to what this AI is telling you, yeah, I think we're in some trouble there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think we really have let this genie out of the bottle. Like, there's no putting it back in now. And What do we do with it? I've got a
Yeah, we're
buddy.
here.
I volunteer in the Cloud Native Computing Foundation in the AI
Mhm.
Technical Advisory Group, TAG. There's a guy in there that's he's writing the security white paper for CNCF for AI security, and he's been doing security for decades, and he has experience in AI security. I want it'd be fascinating to have him on and ask him some of these questions and see what his take on it is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if I had to be, let's say, security conscious about AI, right? Let's say tomorrow, an organization calls me up and it's like, "Hey, we want to deploy AI. If you had to say what is the most strictest way that you could like protect us, what would you do?" I would tell them you got to silo it, right? Like whatever the intention for that AI is, least privilege access, and that's not just identity based access. That is on the machines itself. So let's say you're running it on a virtual machine, you need to remove all tools that it does not need access to. And of the tools that it has access to, let's say, right, they have to be very specific. So it can't be something like a wget or a curl, for instance, right? Because once you give access to that, it can do a lot. There's a huge surface area that it can get to, especially if it has access to the internet. And that's the other thing,
Yeah.
right? Network access. It needs to be so scoped down. Like maybe everything that it does is on a virtual machine, let's say, and all traffic from that virtual machine must go through, let's say, like a firewall, or for instance, right? So that you're able to track what it's doing, you'll be able to inspect it. But then comes into the whole thing of like, how could you ever essentially try to have a human do oversight onto the AI, which then becomes okay, do you need another piece of AI to protect yourself from the AI? And then how do you protect yourself from that AI? It's just one of those like nesting rushing doll problems, right? But ultimately, it would just be lock that down as best as possible from the network perspective, from the tools and capabilities it has access to, from permissions perspective. And then even after all of that, I honestly would recommend to not even do it, in my opinion, because all of that comes with the concept of like it's not going to be able to circumvent that somehow. And after we talked about like, could it technically create code to run on a system, and then from that system, it would be able to export or do something else that it wasn't supposed to do? Probably. And there might be something there that at least I'm not thinking about that it would then be able to get into. And so it's like once you've done it and you've implemented it into your environment, I feel like the amount of security that you have to put onto that thing, in my opinion, right now, is not worth it. It's not worth that risk. There might be some people who think otherwise because they're making money off of it and it's revenue generating. But to me, I wouldn't want to take the risk.
Yeah, honestly, it makes me think like at the very least, I forget what it's called, but there is a way to do security with Docker containers. So a Docker container is basically an application that you're running in a very portable way from machine to machine. So you build an application, you put it in a container, and you run it. And if that application is facing the web, somebody can therefore try to hack it. And if they succeed, in theory, a Docker container should not be privileged. It should not have access to the
Right.
machines, most of it, to be able to expand and infiltrate other things, which is what hackers eventually are going to try to do. They want to get as much access as they can to do as much whatever they're trying to do as they can. But what you want to do with a Docker container is monitor the actions that the Docker container is doing on the system. So if you see that you're not going to see necessarily what the hacker is trying to do, but if that Docker container tries to do something that's like completely out of scope, like ping a database on the network or
Yeah.
something that it should not be doing, or access a command on the system that it should not be doing, you want to know as soon as that happens. I forget the term for it. I don't. Maybe you know, Carlos, but you got to do something
Well, you're
like that
thinking
with.
about
Oh, go ahead.
it sounds like two different things: container hardening and then just the observability aspect, right? And auditing. Um,
Yeah.
I would say like even with all of that, it's funny enough. When I first started my career in technology, I actually wanted to go into like penetration testing and like red teaming, like all that kind of stuff. Uh, and one of the things that always concerns me about that is, technically speaking, right? Let's say you've got a piece of code or even a binary, right? If I can't read it necessarily and be like, okay, I know exactly what this is doing. I'm not skilled enough to do that, right? I have to have some sort of either decompiler or some sort of way to translate that from binary into plain text, and that can sometimes be very complicated. But an AI model, on the other hand, who might be trained to do that, to take what was binary and decompile that so that it goes back into now maybe even what's the word I'm looking for? It's not hex. I can't remember the actual term for it, but essentially being able to take that where it's decompiled and take that into like it doesn't even need plain text at that point. But if you want to make it human readable, make it into plain text, right? And then retransform that to what it wants it to do and recompile that. The ability for a machine that can actually try to get to its objective with the options that it has available to it, I think that to me is where the risk is too much. The fact that I know that it can do that and it is possible to do that, even if you say, hey, you don't have permissions to do this stuff. Well, what is the thing that's telling me I don't have permissions to do it? It's just another piece of code that's running on the system, right? It's the underlying operating system that has its own libraries and tools. And if there's a vulnerability in there, which there always is vulnerabilities in your operating system, just nope, I'm good.
Yeah.
I won't take that risk.
No,
Maybe I'll let
honestly.
someone else try it first.
And you think about like AI is very, very, very good at filling in the blanks. You give it a picture with a
Yeah.
hole in it, and it'll fill in the hole, like, and it will be pretty good at it for a lot of things. So
Yeah, 100%. Well, do you want to move on to the next thing, or do you want to wrap up this conversation?
I want to go hide in a cave. Yeah, let's move on.
Alrighty.
We've got DevOps maturity model. We've got quantum computing, the AI compliance standard that you've been working on, and HIPAA laws. I'll let you
Let's
pick.
talk DevOps maturity, and we can just kind of touch on a few things, and we can even build upon it in the next call,
Yeah.
if we want, or another call, I should say. Um, so I thought that was an interesting prompt, right? Being able to say, what is a DevOps maturity model? And the way that I kind of started approaching it in my mind was saying, okay, well, when does DevOps become relevant, right? And so I started thinking about it from a revenue perspective. When you have, let's say, younger organizations or even a solo entrepreneur who wants to build an application, right? And let's say they're bootstrapping it and they're trying to do it themselves. You may completely throw DevOps principles out the window, right? In terms of CI/CD, in terms of maybe microservices, and doing all sorts of automation. I throw that completely out the window because you're focused on trying to get to the point where you're sustainable enough where you can focus on those things to optimize. That's really what DevOps is doing. It's an optimization. It's an optimization. What's what I'm looking for? Exercise. And so to get to a level of maturity that's important, I think it comes in stages, right? So let's say that you're early stage and you say, okay, I'm going to deploy this some sort of application on a virtual machine. That's great. I would recommend at least doing some sort of deployment pipeline so you're not doing it completely manually all the time and having to redo everything. But it may not be worth your while, right? You could do it manually if you're like, I'm just going to script it instead of creating a pipeline. I'm just going to do it on my own machine and script it out to deploy it. Okay, cool. That's fine. And let's say that's the first stage of your DevOps journey. Sounds good. Now, let's say you're at the point where you've created an application and you now need to start generating revenue. If you're lucky, maybe you have either interns or people working purely on equity, and you guys have a small team now, but you're still working without revenue. You may look at doing some more DevOps things in order to streamline or optimize how much it costs in terms of labor. You want to keep that down. You want to remove the hurdles out from other way. And you also want to make sure you have at least some sort of guardrail in place so that people aren't, for instance, deploying resources in the cloud and costing you a lot of money that you, quite frankly, can't replace right now. So you might take that step a little bit further and say, okay, you know what? Instead of doing this script that I had on my own computer and to deploy an application, now I'm going to actually look at pipelines because I need to collaborate. And that's generally speaking why a lot of version control systems like GitHub, GitLab, etc., they come with pipelines. So you might do something out of the box there. And that might be your second step of like, okay, we're going to take something that's manual. We're going to do a little bit of automation on it to optimize workflows here so that we can collaborate across different people. And then you might add on to that, let's say, some small value adds like, hey, we want consistency. So we'll do like formatters or linters or something like that. And it's like, that's fine. Maybe that's all you need for that. Now, let's say you're starting to go down the path of you want revenue. You're getting your first customer on. Okay. I would say once you start getting customers, that's when a lot of other stuff becoming important. Things such as observability. So these are what I always call their day two operations, right? So if you got something in, let's say, production, then you want to make sure that your customers are having the best experience possible. And that if something goes down, you know about it, you're aware. I mean, we were just talking about AI. If something's doing something you don't want it to do, you want to make sure somebody's alerted or you have some sort of traceability about it. So that's when it starts becoming important there. And you want to make sure you have good coverage on that. The problem that brings about is at what point do you give up, right? Because you can always improve, always improve, always improve. So from a company or an organization perspective, a team, you need to determine what works best for you. And you need to be honest with yourself. That's the other side of it. DevOps is 100% a, I guess you could call it a self-managed process where you are reporting really only against yourself. You have examples of what other people have done in other companies, but like, for instance, I'm not judging what company B is doing over there if that works best for them. I might not have decided the best way to go, but I'm not on their team. That might be the best thing for them today. So you have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, I know what I need and where I want to be from a security perspective. And I know where I want to be and where I need to be from an observability perspective. And I also know what my budget is. I know how much it's costing me, how much time it spends, and where I can put that towards furthering our goals. So once you've determined that, that's basically where your scope ends. So you need to know that part. Now let's say you've entered, I think was this a third or fourth stage, where you're a small team, you have revenue. Okay. So that revenue that you've attained, now you can start looking again. You've identified the scope as to what was important, but maybe you need to reevaluate. Maybe that scope has changed, or maybe you have different requirements coming in from your customers, such as what we see all the time: security and compliance with SOC 2. So you need to shift focus a little bit, right? You need to say, okay, I have some sort of automation to enhance my collaboration across my team. I have some sort of observability because I have something in production and I want to have the best user experience possible. And I want to be able to support my product. Now I have a different set of requirements from companies saying, I need you to be secure and I need you to have some sort of professional implementation so that I know that when I do business with you, or I have some sort of security privacy in terms of data privacy laws that I need to adhere to, that you're going to adhere to that. And that's where you start getting into the concept of, data encryption at rest, dealing with like database backups, highly available systems, disaster recovery, those kind of components, right? That is not something you should be thinking about day one when you're starting a company. That has absolutely no bearing on whether or not you're going to make it. So you got to think about that when it's right for you. And also, depending upon how much revenue you're getting, right? Let's say you have one customer, depending upon the deal size, let's say they're paying you $10,000 a month. That's one of those where it's like, is it really such a strict requirement, or do we have 2, 3, 4, 5 customers before I start implementing that, right? If I've got one customer and they're paying me $1 million a month and they're asking for it, yeah, I'm going to go put those controls in place because they're asking me to do it. And we're funded well enough, hopefully at that point, to actually spend the time to do it. Right. Now we're going to go to the next stage. Your company, you are growing now. You've got a medium to large size team. You have revenue to support that team. support your product development and your operations. What do you do? This is where we start getting into more of the enterprise types of DevOps experiences, right? How do I do developer self-service? How do I enhance that observability? I want to be more robust. Maybe I have a whole team dedicated towards looking at the system and to being able to support my customers, right? You might even look at DevOps in terms of the financial aspects of it, or from customer success, right? Of how do I get that data over into other people's hands or in their machines so they can take actionable insights on that data. Maybe I'm trying to adhere to the next big thing when everybody was trying to shift over with AI, right? Still are. How do I implement that now? You can start expanding the scope of DevOps, and that's why when people say DevOps, it really comes down to development, security, DevSec, Fin, finance, machine learning, and operations these days. There's a lot that goes into it. And so by the time that you get to that point where you've got a medium to large size team, now you're working with like larger initiatives that require more specialized skill set. If you're talking Kubernetes, you're talking network security, maybe you've got some sort of security and compliance framework you're reaching to. There's a lot that comes after the fact there. And so if you can get to that point, then I'd say the gold standard is that focus on developer self-service. Because now you're at a point where you've got your teams that are large enough that they're collaborating, hopefully, maybe in silos, but they're collaborating. And you want to be able to give them the ability to iterate as fast as you were able to when you only had a few people. And that's where you start thinking about what typically people have been referring to as internal developer platforms, right? IDPs. And that's where people start thinking about, okay, do I purchase one? Do I go the path of getting Backstage it was created by Spotify? Do I purchase one commercial off the shelf product? Do we go down the path of, like, for instance, DuploCloud? Do I maybe even go down the path of just building it myself and creating a whole team that's dedicated towards this? That's when they start achieving those goals. And you even have people who are doing it, let's say, the HashiCorp way of saying, I'm going to use, let's say, ServiceNow, which is my IT service management solution, as the UI. And on the back end, I'm just using my Terraform modules from a private repository. So that's what people try to get to. And as far as I'm aware, that's pretty much as far as you really need to go at that point. And then it becomes much more of support. You're trying to continually iterate, trying to support the next big thing. Optimize. Cost optimization is always a big thing. Just making sure you're good on security. The next security thing that comes out and really highlights a bunch of vulnerabilities, making sure you're covered there. Ransomware, things of that nature, identity access management. It's really where you start branching off into different things on that realm. But if you can get to that point, to that level of maturity, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money. Who knows? Maybe there's going to be an AI thing that'll help you get there much faster, but it's not easy to attain. And so to me, that's really where it comes down from a maturity standpoint.
Yeah, from my thinking about it, we've talked about in our blog and stuff the observational maturity model for your observability. How observationally mature are you? How much insight do you have into your application? The DevOps maturity model, and to some extent the observability maturity model, but the DevOps maturity model is so much more complex. It almost makes sense to be like the DevOps maturity matrix model, I guess. So you can have, if you're thinking like a matrix, where are my hands?
Yeah.
Not on the screen here. And you have like numbers, or you have, how would it be? Like subjects going down, like of DevOps. And then you have numbers across the top. And so, where are you at for each of those items? I don't know, have you seen roadmap.sh?
No, and I'm going to go Google it right now.
Yeah, here, I'll try to bring it up. So, I guess you're not seeing my screen. Yeah, bring it up on your end. And yeah, we got the way that we've set up this stream. Carlos can't see my screen, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. So the DevOps maturity model, if you look at roadmap.sh/DevOps, you click on DevOps on there, you've got, and I love this thing. I preach about this. I talk about it all the time. It shows everything that you need to do to learn to be a DevOps engineer. And I think the other side of that coin is, what does your organization need to have DevOps? And there, it's not quite the same. There's going to be a lot more that an organization is going to need versus what a person needs to do that job. But you think of all of those different things on there. We're talking about serverless, cloud providers, networking and protocols. You need a little bit of a lot of different things. The containers we were talking about, version control, terminal, operating system, programming language. And if you go down to the bottom, you have configuration management, provisioning, CI/CD. That's your pipelines, your automation deployment, monitoring. So the observability, which is, I guess, a subset of DevOps maturity model, is the observational maturity model, logs, and the list goes on. You really need a matrix for A, where you want to be, and B, what you have now, so that you can realistically make a plan of, at what stage do I want to be, stage 1, stage 2, like building a startup from the beginning. Where do I want to be with each of these items at what point? What's going to be most important? And of course, that's going to change as your startup grows. You get more clients and you get different needs. Things pop up, things happen. But I almost wonder if there would be a way to turn this DevOps maturity model into some sort of matrix. And that's the idea, is that at DuploCloud this year, I'm going to be working on building this DevOps maturity model. There are some out there that are not very robust or nothing substantial. So as I think about creating this, what characteristics and how is it going to look? So that's where my mind went, was the matrix thing for each of these.
Yeah, no, this is actually really cool. And there's a couple things I'm like thinking about off the top of my head when you're bringing this up. One, on this roadmap, I'm actually looking at like how many of these items get checked off, for instance, when you go to university for this kind of stuff, right? Like, I mean, just going down the list, programming languages, probably learned that in university somewhere. You should have a pretty good understanding of operating systems too. That at least I know I took an operating systems class when I was going through college. Terminal knowledge, also something I learned in college. Version control system, yep. Version control systems, yeah. Containers, they're probably teaching that these days. But you learn about virtual machines. Now, after you get to containers and you say what is and how to set up X, everything from there down, besides maybe I guess it's most of it, yeah. Maybe CI/CD tools and GitOps. That's basically what you learn on the job, right? Like people have these different things. You start learning about them. You do the implementation of them, and you start knocking it out. But this is really, really cool. The second thing I was thinking about was the Matrix, right? Not the movie or the book, but
we're almost there, though. So we were thinking about that earlier.
I definitely think you could 100% create a matrix. It just becomes, okay, what is your X and what is your Y, right? I mean, X, I would assume, is like, let's say stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, levels of maturity, right? Maybe, or is it Y with levels of maturity? I would assume it's like over time, you would have to have your levels of maturity. The reason why I'm kind of curious which one that would go on is because I feel like you need to have some sort of predefined metric to say, at this point is when you should be this DevOps, this maturity. At this point, you should be that level of maturity, right? And so what does that look like? That's why for me, I'm thinking of it in terms of revenue. At this point of revenue, this is where I need to be. At this point of revenue, this is where I need to be. Because that to me makes sense. It's the growth of the organization. I can put that in terms of revenue. Maybe it's time. Maybe it's team size. I think there's a lot there. So I think if we pick what that looks like, I think there's definitely a way to make a model of your maturity for DevOps and how to go get to where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think the strategy changes depending on the industry. You talk about, like, if you need HIPAA compliance, or I guess in Europe you're always going to need GDPR, but that's it's really strategy, the DevOps maturity strategy matrix model. What DevOps strategy, implementation strategy are you going to use at your startup? And then how do you adapt it? So, yeah, I like the matrix thing.
I would almost say like if you start including frameworks on it, then like you'd have to have multiple maturity models, right? Like if you said, "Hey, I'm going to be a health tech company," right? I need to have some sort of little DevOps maturity. Um, I would almost say, "Okay, that's great. You can still get away with a lot of different things without needing to go all the way full enterprise, for instance." So like firewalls, for instance, you can use just regular security groups, for instance, to say that you have a stateful firewall. You could do things like you should be worried about data security and privacy and things of that nature, and I role-based access control. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to have robust pipelines. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to, for instance, even use version control. I mean, I highly recommend you do it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I think it just pushes like security a little bit further to the left, but that would with all of them, right? If you went through any compliance framework, if you had a DevOps maturity model, security gets immediately pushed left instead of being pushed to the right. Um, so yeah, I mean, it can go a lot of different ways if you wanted to like use that as a baseline for how to create the matrix.
Yeah, I'm curious now. Next week, excuse me, I'm going to be interviewing one of my buddies actually that I met in Paris last year, right before I met that lady on the bus. But he has an AI startup, and we're going to be talking about him implementing DevOps at his startup. That's something that they've been working on the past 7 or 8 months. Maybe, excuse me, throughout our next interviews, or if we do further interviews with other people, then we start asking and getting primary sources this year. What is your DevOps implementation strategy, and what has it been at your startup, and where do you see yourself going as part of making a model that works for more people? So
Yeah, that'd be super interesting, especially if like this could lead towards as we go through with first sources, almost like creating sort of data backed evidence to say like this is actually what people are doing in the implementation and where they are. Does that necessarily mean that they're behind, or is that really just what? At least, for instance, what I was saying in terms of DevOps maturity, is that more of a romanticized idea of what you should achieve, and the reality is actually a little bit less, or maybe it's a little bit more.
yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying a second ago, that hey, you need if you need something, then you're behind. If you're talking about observability and you don't have the insight into the application, well, then you're not quite mature enough. But if your DevOps is good and you're doing fine, you're not nothing's taking a lot of time, etc., then maybe that counts as you're mature for your stage right now. So
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
how are you doing on
Well,
time?
I mean, I'm pretty good on time. I'd say I think in total, doing it for an hour is a pretty good time stop, unless you want to go into another conversation. Um, I leave it up to you.
We could do one more real quick
Sure.
and call it a day.
What do we got?
Let's see. I think a good quick one is books on tech and leadership we're reading.
Oof. All right. Um,
Maybe that's not quick.
no, it is quick. It's one that was like, ooh, I have to like, I don't have my books right next to me, so I have to think about what they were. Think Again. That was one. That was a really good one. Um, I personally, for me, I like books that are going to be almost thought leadership. They really bring out like questioning why is it what we do? Why is it what we do is also successful? Or what is the impact that we're having from a psychology point of view? Also, Think Again was one of them. Um, this one's kind of, which is funny, only recently, I guess, has been controversial, but the Phoenix Project, I read that.
That's
I thought it
controversial.
was, yeah, I was reading recently that people thought it was a really terrible book to start off with to understand DevOps, and I was like, I thought it was a fantastic book to start off with
Yeah.
DevOps. But apparently, there's a group of people out there that do not think it was good, because if you go into the details of it, even though it's kind of keeping it high level, they're like, well, it's not accurate. So I guess, everyone's critic kind of thing. But it was good. Think nothing yet. Start with Why. It's another one that's really interesting. Um, and then there's one other one I'm thinking about. Oh, the one that's been around for forever. How to make friend or no, how to was it how to make friends and win people or something like that.
How to make friends and influence people. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. That one. That one's always a good one to go through. Um, it's funny because a lot of these books, when you read them, and for instance, I'll think back to leadership that I've had throughout my career, and even some of the leadership positions that I've had to like be put into, and I think about what happened then versus now, and what decision either did I make or did someone else make that I'm like, huh, I see now why that had an impact that it did, or I see maybe a mistake that had happened, or maybe there could have been something we could have course corrected during that time. Um, so I definitely encourage anybody who has the initiative to grow, to learn, to be in leadership, or to even just be a role model, really, to continue to never stop growing, right? Just because we finished school, or some of the best leaders I've ever met never went to like college, for instance, and they're absolutely phenomenal leaders, but they always reading, they're always learning, they're always growing. They never just limit themselves. Being able to do that and continually come to work and just be just even that fractionally better or that fractionally different, or try something new even if it might not work that day, I think has a significant impact not only for yourself but like for others around you. So those are the big ones that I have these days. um, I have one other book right now that I'm reading, but it has nothing to do with leadership. It's I'm reading a Sherlock Holmes book right now for
Oh,
entertainment.
nice. Nice, nice.
What about yourself? Anything good?
Well, right now I'm reading, it's in Spanish. It's a Chris Voss book. And in Spanish, the title is Break the Barrier of No. In English, it has a
Mm,
completely different title, and I don't know what it is, but it's Chris Voss's most famous book, I think. But it's about negotiating. So he
yeah.
was a negotiator for the FBI and has, I mean, decades and decades of experience negotiating. He's one of the best in the field. But his entire thing is negotiating isn't just about using tactics or tricks or whatever to get what you want. It's about
Mhm.
introducing empathy into the conversation and listening to the other person. And you're talking like people who have like literal, I don't know what we can say on YouTube, like, I mean, hostage situations. We'll leave it at that, like
Yeah.
where lives are at risk. And he uses empathy and listening to connect with these people and bring them down from whatever anxiety and stress that they're in. And how in business, it's exactly the same. If you listen to people, then you'll come out with a deal that's best for both people. And that's the idea, is that you want both people, both parties to end up happy. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And so it's really interesting the way that he talks about empathy. I don't have the book with me, but there's some great passages. Maybe we'll share them in some videos later. But I absolutely love how to make friends and influence people. And I've never finished the book because I always end up giving it to somebody before I'm done with it, and then buying it again and starting over. But it is just such a good book, and also about empathy and
Yeah.
listening and bringing that energy with you wherever you go, and reminding yourself constantly growing, like you said. And then Start with Why is a great book. Also very much recommend that. And Deep Focus or Deep Work. That's another one in
Okay.
English. In Spanish, it's different. Deep Work is one of my favorite books. So,
Yeah. The I think a lot of it. What's the word I'm looking for? When they talk about the empathy and the ability to listen, um, it's pretty much a common theme, I think, for a lot of these leadership books. That's actually important, because working with people is, quite frankly, one of the most difficult things you can do in general. And so when we're collaborating as a team, when people are coming with different backgrounds, or maybe just someone's having a bad morning, right? Being able to actually listen and be empathetic and to actually, I guess, care, quite frankly, it has such a profound effect. And I think it was Start With Why that brought in, like, try to bring in some of like the scientific aspects of it in terms of like the limbic system of the brain, which I think is the one that was um it's like the center part of your brain that's supposed to be like your subconscious and stuff like that. They talk about how the when you're, especially in sales, people are much more emotionally driven than even they recognize. And so there's a lot of that comes into play in terms of how do I actually feel about the person I'm talking to? How do I feel about the product? And I might think logically this product is amazing, but I might feel internally there's something that's off here. Something that hasn't really given me the confidence to say yes yet. And that's the part of the I guess you call it the sale that really actually is skillful. Being able to listen, hear, and just try to not attack that, but to tackle it, right? To say, okay, how do I help you make not only a logical judgment that this is right for both of us, but it also feels right. And that's what I think is really important. Being able to connect with them on a level, and you do that obviously by being empathetic and listening, to really make sure that both parties are walking away saying this is exactly what is right for us. And I think I believe it start with why, because then they can go with the argument that most organizations don't do that, that they will try to use manipulations such as, cutting costs or providing, free whatever, in order to close a deal, rather than being like, okay, is this actually right for you? And if it is, let's do this together. And if it's not, why is it not? Is there something that I'm not really getting to the core of? Or is there just not really a fit here? And we both just need to recognize that. And it's not worth our time. So, yeah, I love reading those kind of books. And you gotta look up what that book was that you just mentioned, because definitely sounds like something I would totally want to read, especially if it's got some interesting tidbits from a world-renowned negotiator.
Yeah, I'll look it up. It's Chris Voss. I've got to learn the title in English, but
Yeah.
um, but yeah. To finish off, what hobby are you working on this week? Something personal.
Oh Lord. Um, I'm always working on different hobbies, man. That's the problem. So I'm always doing like different things. I try to do a couple minutes at least a day of like the guitars back there.
Nice.
Just practice it. And then I've been, learning Spanish. I've been trying to get that to do 1 hour every day consistently, trying to just continue until it's just like set in stone. Um, and then like even personal projects such as like I wanted to learn how to do NeoVim, which was like a terminal editor instead of
Dude,
using
I've
like
got
VS
that
Code.
tab open right now. I've got that tab open, waiting for me to like look into it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I did that, and I'm actually super happy I did it. I think the guy I used on YouTube, which was the most help, I think his name, he was like Typecraft or something like that. That was the channel. Easily by far the most actually useful person for learning NeoVim, I thought, because he went through everything and was like obviously good at it.
Nice.
So I did that and then like forced myself to like use it. I haven't touched it. I probably in like a week or so. But now whenever I use anything, like, instead of VS Code, I'll open it in NeoVim. And the last thing is like that I've been looking into is like home servers. It's funny because like we help design data centers and stuff for people all the time, especially in the cloud. And I'm like, well, why don't I just like spend the time to do this at like my own house and like turn it into like this cool little data center, because I have the space for it. I could even do like a rack or even put in like a network firewall and stuff like that in my electrical room. Um, so I keep thinking about that, and I'm like, oh, I should just invest the time and money to do it. But adulting comes up, and just haven't done it.
Dude, I've got a home lab. It is currently as off as can be, so it's AI safe. But you can get some used Dell servers that are like 6, 7, 8 years old on eBay
Yeah.
for. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this because like rip your wallet. You'll spend way too much money, but you can get like really, really good used equipment, and it for home lab stuff, it's great. So it is a really cool hobby, especially like we're dealing with the cloud all the time. It's good to know what's behind the cloud. So
Yes, yeah. And I would one day I think I'm gonna do it. Right now it's like I said, adulting things come up. I gotta redo my deck, and I have to there was one other thing that I have to go check. I use a Trello board to organize my own life. So I know what I need to do and what's in progress and what's done. The first thing that comes to mind is the deck has to be done this quarter. Um, and so that's the first priority right now. And then I'll start thinking about like some of these other nice to haves.
well, next Ctrl+Alt+Deploy show is on your deck in person.
Assuming it's done by then. They are way more expensive than I thought it was going to be.
Ooh, yeah, always is.
Hmm. All right. Anything else?
No, I think we're ready for the outro. So if you haven't given us your hot take yet on any of this stuff, we want to hear what you think about AI and the DevOps maturity model on Carlos's deck. Any of it, all of the above. So get your fingies ready to do some typing, and when you're I guess at this point you're going to be viewing it later. So we want to see up in the comment section and see what you like, didn't like, and great to have you here. Thanks for being here, and we will see you on the next one. And hit us up on LinkedIn. So we'll put the links down in the description down there. So ask us DevOps questions. See how we can help you with your DevOps needs at your startup, wherever you're working. And let's see, I'm on social medias as Surfing Doggo. So Carlos, do you have any social media you want to share?
I try to actually don't do social media that much, but I am on LinkedIn. You can still find me. I think it's technically under like CompSci Carlos, so I made it when I was like in college, but definitely on
Nice.
there. And then usually if you see anybody who's like that one guy on anything like Discord or things of that nature, that's probably me. It's my the handle for everything.
Nice. That one guy. All right. Well, join us for our next live stream. Subscribe. We're going to make a post on the YouTube community post thing down. I don't know where it is on YouTube, but subscribe. And we do have a newsletter. We'll put the link down in the description. That's another way we'll send out a blast. And we do like a monthly useful newsletter. We try to be respectful and useful. So hopefully you find it that way. If not, let us know in the comments. And we will see you guys on the next one. Thanks for being here.